Xyler of the Cathar prided himself on his observational acuity. His multifaceted eyes, a legacy of his arthropodal ancestors, could process 1,000 distinct data streams simultaneously. He could track the subtle shimmer of a Glyptian's hydrostatic field, the minute exoskeletal twitches of a fellow Cathar that betrayed emotion, and the slow, geological sigh of a lithoid taking a nutrient supplement. Yet the humans remained an infuriating, chaotic anomaly. He sat at his customary table in the Galactic Academy's primary refectory, a vast, domed chamber where the atmosphere was a carefully calibrated compromise, and gravity was modulated to a gentle zero point 0.8 standard GS. Across the hall, the two human exchange students, Ava Chen and Ben Carter, were eating. It was a common enough activity, but the way they did it was, to Xyler's analytical mind, a study in reckless abandon. Their table was a riot of colors and textures. They shared plates, passing between them a steaming bowl of fibrous green stalks, a slab of cooked animal muscle drenched in a crimson sauce, and small, hardened kernels of a grain that had been exploded by heat. Ben Carter bit into a bright red pod, and a moment later his face flushed, his ocular membranes leaked fluid, and he began rhythmically forcing air from his respiratory orifice. Ava Chen laughed, a loud, barking sound that vibrated unpleasantly against Xyler's sensitive antennae. "He is poisoning himself again," came a soft, liquid voice beside him. Lyra, a Glyptian from the tranquil water world of Aquaria, slid into the seat. Her smooth, gray skin had a damp sheen even in the refectory's dry air, and her large, black eyes held a perpetual depth. "And she finds his distress amusing. Their social dynamics are turbulent. It is inefficient," Xyler clicked, his mandibles twitching in a gesture of Cathar disapproval. "His body is exhibiting a classic toxin rejection response. Yet he initiated the event voluntarily, and she offers no aid, only auditory assault. It defies all logic. The Cathar homeworld, Cathar Prime, was a world of perfect, stable order. Their sun emitted a constant, unwavering light. The seasons were non-existent, the temperature varying by less than 2 degrees across the entire planet. Their food was synthesized, nutritionally perfect and utterly predictable. Chaos was a foreign concept, a theoretical danger discussed in astrophysics and sociology. Humans, it seemed, bathed in it for recreation. Perhaps it is not about efficiency, Lyra mused, her gaze fixed on the humans. Ben was now gulping down a blue liquid, his distress subsiding. He grinned at Ava, who pushed a piece of the cooked mussel towards him with her fork. "I sense a bond, a strange one. It's like the agitated currents around a deep-sea thermal vent, dangerous but teeming with energy." This was the core of the problem. Humans hailed from a planet designated by the Galactic Concordance as a Class 7 death world. The designation was almost a formality. No Class 7 world had ever produced a sapient, spacefaring species before. Such worlds were characterized by extreme environmental instability, hyper-aggressive megafauna, and a biosphere locked in a perpetual, violent competition. They were quarantine zones, cosmic nature preserves for things too dangerous to exist elsewhere. Yet here were the humans. They had not clawed their way to the stars on warships, bristling with planetary weapons. They had arrived in vessels of science and exploration, broadcasting mathematics, music, and a seemingly endless database of stories. The Concordance, baffled but bound by its own first contact protocols, had granted them provisional membership, and, as a gesture of goodwill, offered 2 scholarships to its most prestigious institution. The initial assumption among the student body was that humans must have survived by hiding. They must have evolved in some sheltered, geologically stable enclave on their violent planet, developing their intelligence in isolation from the horrors outside. They were assumed to be fragile, brilliant things, glass cannons who had thought their way out of a slaughterhouse. The evidence, however, did not align with the hypothesis. In their physical conditioning modules, the humans were formidable. Grak, a Gorak from a 2.1G world, was the strongest student in their cohort, his dense frame and powerful muscles a product of his brutal homeworld gravity. Yet Ben Carter, slender and unassuming, could match him in endurance exercises, running for staggering lengths of time on the track tread, his body slick with perspiration. A shockingly inefficient cooling method, but his rhythm unbroken. Ava Chen, in simulations requiring fine motor control and rapid reaction times, consistently scored in the top percentile, her focus absolute, her hands steady even when subjected to simulated atmospheric turbulence or system failures. "They are contradictions," Grak rumbled, joining them at the table. His massive, rock-like form settled onto the bench with a heavy thud that made Xyler's legs skitter. Strong, but not from high gravity. fast but with no obvious pursuit predators listed in their primary biology files. Their homeworld is a Class 7, but they act as if they are on a leisure excursion. Files are heavily redacted, Xyler stated. It was a source of constant frustration. The Concordance, in its wisdom, had classified the full details of Earth's biosphere as potentially psychologically destabilizing to non-Deathworlder species. They were given summaries. High axial tilt causing extreme seasons, a large moon creating powerful tides, rampant tectonic activity, a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere that was corrosively reactive over geological time. The biological data was even more sparse, listing terms like mammal, reptile, and insect without useful context. Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Zethul, a towering entity of shimmering energy and crystalline nodes who projected his voice into the mind of every student in the hall. Attention, second-year cadets. The cohort survival practical will commence in 3 rotations. Your designated world is Xylos. Team assignments are now being distributed to your data pads. Prepare your excursion kits accordingly. Dismissed, a wave of groans and anxious murmurs swept the refectory. Xylos was infamous. A Class 4 world, it was the Academy's go-to final exam for fledgling xenobiologists and diplomats. A place designed to test one's ability to survive in a hostile but not impossibly hostile environment. It had a semi-toxic atmosphere, aggressive flora that could inject neurotoxins, and a single, notoriously persistent apex predator known as a skittermaw. Xyler checked his data pad, his antennae drooping. Team designation. Gamma 7, members Xyler Cathar, Lyra Glipshin, Grak Gorak, and Ava Chen and Ben Carter, human. Lyra made a soft, burbling sound of dismay. The water recyclers on the excursion suits are never calibrated for Glipshin needs. I will be desiccated within an hour. My mass will make me a target for the skittermaw, Grak grumbled, flexing his thick four-fingered hands. It is known to hunt by seismic vibration. Xyler's mind, however, was focused on a different problem. He looked over at the human table. Ben and Ava were looking at their data pads too, but they weren't groaning. They were leaning in close, pointing at the screen and smiling. Their expressions were not of dread, but of eager anticipation. It was, Xyler concluded, the most illogical reaction of all. The glass cannons were looking forward to visiting a firing range. His hypothesis required immediate and drastic revision. The air on Xylos tasted like rust and decay. Even through his suit's filtration system, Xyler could detect the metallic tang of airborne spores and the cloying sweetness of rot. The landscape was a chaotic jumble of jagged, obsidian rock and sickly yellow vegetation. Geothermal vents hissed steam into the dim, reddish light cast by the world's weak sun. Atmospheric pressure is 1.3 standard, humidity is 12%. Prepare for suit strain and potential desiccation. Ava's voice crackled over the comms, crisp and professional. She had, without being asked, assumed the role of team lead, her voice a strange point of calm in the disorienting environment. My joints are already aching from the pressure, Grak complained. The Gorak, for all his strength, was adapted to the specific, crushing gravity of his homeworld. The combination of high pressure and low gravity on Xylos made his movements awkward and labored. The air, it feels sharp, Lyra whispered, her own voice thin. She was constantly adjusting the hydroregulator on her suit, her dark eyes scanning the ground as if expecting the dry, cracked earth to suck the moisture right out of her. Xyler was trying to process the flood of chaotic sensory input. The ground was uneven, the wind gusted unpredictably, and the spore-releasing fungi pulsed with a faint, nauseating bioluminescence that threw off his depth perception. It was a nightmare of disorder, and then there were the humans. Ben Carter had his helmet's external microphone activated, and he was whistling. A tuneless, airy sound that was utterly at odds with the oppressive silence. He moved with a light-footed grace, his head on a swivel, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. Ava was a few paces ahead, her rifle held in a low-ready position, her posture alert but relaxed. They weren't just coping. They looked comfortable. Carter ceased the unnecessary noise, Xyler transmitted, his tone sharp with irritation. You could attract predators. Relax, XY, Ben's voice came back, infuriatingly casual. Anything that can hear my whistling over this wind already knows we're here. Besides, it keeps the spirits up. This place reminds me of a national park back home. Bit more sulfur, maybe. Chose not to dignify that with a response. Comparing this hazardous wasteland to a designated preserve for recreation was the height of insanity. Their objective was to navigate 20 clicks of this terrain, retrieve a geological sensor beacon from a cave system, and return to the extraction point. Standard survival time for a non-Deathworlder team was projected at 48 hours, with a 30% chance of requiring emergency evac. The first major challenge came 2 hours in. The sky, a murky ochre, darkened to a bruised purple with alarming speed. Barometric pressure is dropping fast, Ava announced. Looks like an acid rain squall. We need cover, now. That rock formation, 200 meters northeast. The alien trio looked at each other in alarm. Acid rain on Xylos was a well-documented hazard, capable of compromising their suits' outer layers over prolonged exposure. They began to move, their steps clumsy with panic. Grack lumbered, his heavy feet cracking the fragile crust of the soil. Lyra seemed to shrink into her suit, her movements hesitant. The humans were already halfway to the outcropping. They moved with a fluid, practiced urgency that was completely different from the aliens' panicked scramble. They reached the shallow overhang of black rock just as the first fat, sizzling drops began to fall. The rest of the team tumbled in after them, breathing heavily. The rain came down in a torrent, streaking the rocks with corrosive trails that smoked and hissed. Xyler watched his suit's integrity sensor, his mind calculating the rate of decay. They would be safe here, but the squall could last for hours, eating into their mission time. Ben, however, had unsealed a container from his pack and was holding it out in the downpour. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. "It will destroy the container." "Nah, this is high-grade polymer," Ben said cheerfully. He swirled the container, collecting a small amount of the hissing liquid. He then pulled a small sensor from his belt and dipped it in. pH of about 4.5, nasty, but I've seen worse. You could probably drink it after running it through a secondary purifier, less acidic than a Coke. Xyler accessed his internal databanks, carbonated soft drinks. A human beverage. He cross-referenced the chemical composition, carbonic and phosphoric acid. The humans voluntarily ingested liquids more corrosive than the rain that was currently melting the landscape. He felt a wave of cognitive dissonance so strong it made his antennae buzz. "The objective is inside a cave system," Grack rumbled, staring out at the downpour. "If this is the rain, what are the caves like?" "Probably damp," Ava said, not even looking up from the topographical map she had projected from her wrist unit. "We'll need to watch for flash floods and unstable ceilings. Standard stuff." Stuff, for whom? Xyler felt a growing suspicion that the phrase Deathworld was not a descriptor of a planet but of its inhabitants. It wasn't that Earth was hostile to life, it was that the life it produced was hostile. They waited out the rain, the humans resting comfortably while the aliens fretted. When the sky cleared, they pressed on. The entrance to the cave was a dark maw in the side of a cliff, surrounded by the skeletal remains of spore fungi dissolved by the rain. "Okay, comms check. Switch to proximity links, the rock will block long-range signals," Ava commanded. "Lights on, Grack, you're on point. Your mass is a liability outside, but in here you're a battering ram if we need one. Just watch your footing. Ben, you're on rear guard. Lyra, Xyler, stay between us." "Let's go." The authority in her voice was absolute, and no one questioned it. Even Grack, who bristled at taking orders, seemed to recognize the simple, unassailable fact that the humans knew what they were doing. Inside, the cave was worse than Xyler had imagined. It was a tight, winding passage, dripping with the same acidic moisture from the rain, which had seeped through the rock. The air was thick and smelled of ozone and damp stone. Their suit lamps cut sharp cones of light into the oppressive darkness. They had traveled for perhaps 1,000 meters when Grack froze, holding up a hand. "Vibrations," he whispered over the comm. "Something large." Xyler focused his auditory sensors. He could hear it now, a faint, rhythmic scraping sound echoing from deeper within the cave. Scrape, click, scrape. "Click, skittermaw," Lyra breathed, her light trembling. "Everyone, lights off." "Now," Ava's voice was a sharp hiss. The cave plunged into absolute blackness. Xyler's multifaceted eyes struggled to adjust, picking up only the faint, residual heat signatures of his teammates. The scraping grew louder. "It's between us and the beacon," Ben whispered. His voice held no fear, only a kind of tense, analytical focus. "What's the book on these things?" "Heavily armored carapace, 6 legs, powerful mandibles," Xyler recited from the mission briefing, his voice a low thrum. "Hunts by vibration and chemoreception, poor eyesight, solitary hunter. So we can't outrun it and we can't hide from it," Ava concluded. "Fighting it is a last resort, so we need a distraction." She paused for a moment. The scraping was very close now. Xyler could feel the vibration through the soles of his boots. "Ben got a flare?" "Always," came the reply. "On my mark, you pop it and throw it as far as you can down that side passage to the left. The light and heat should draw its attention. The rest of us will move right towards the objective. Move silently." Was a simple plan, but in the terrifying darkness, with the sound of an approaching monster filling the air, it felt like an impossible feat of coordination. Xyler's every instinct screamed at him to flee, to scuttle back the way they came. "Now, Ben," Ava commanded. A brilliant crimson light erupted in the cavern, casting long, dancing shadows. Ben had thrown the flare with a powerful, precise flick of his wrist. It clattered down a narrow offshoot of the main tunnel, bathing it in fiery light. Immediately, the scraping sound changed direction, becoming faster, more agitated as it moved towards the flare. "Go," Ava whispered, and they moved. They crept forward in the residual glow, their movements muffled by the Skittermaw's noisy investigation of the flare. Xyler was amazed by the humans. They moved with a predator's silence, placing each foot with deliberate care. He, Grak, and Lyra shuffled and stumbled behind them, a clumsy herd of prey animals. They rounded a bend and saw it. The beacon, a small metallic tripod emitting a soft blue pulse. And beyond it, silhouetted by the distant flare, was the Skittermaw. It was a horror of chitin and claws. Larger than Grak, it moved with a horrifying insectal speed. Its head, a wedge of black armor, swung back and forth, sniffing the air with long, quivering antennae. It had been fooled by the flare, but not for long. As the flare began to sputter, the beast turned its head back towards the main passage, towards them. There was no time. Ava didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle. But she didn't fire at the creature. She fired at the ceiling above it. A chunk of rock, weakened by the acid rain, cracked and fell. It wasn't large enough to crush the Skittermaw, but it struck its back with a loud thud, making it screech and stumble. In that moment of confusion, Ben darted forward, snatched the beacon, and retreated. Ava yelled, her voice echoing in the confined space. They ran. This time there was no pretense of stealth. They fled back the way they came, the sound of the enraged Skittermaw echoing behind them. Grak, for once, used his mass to their advantage, shoving aside loose rocks and clearing a path. They burst out of the cave mouth into the weak, red daylight, gasping for air. They didn't stop running until they had put a full click between themselves and the cave. They finally collapsed behind another rock formation, their chests heaving. Ben set the beacon down with a triumphant grin. Lyra was shaking uncontrollably. Grak was leaning against a rock, his powerful frame trembling with adrenaline. Xyler's mind was racing, trying to categorize what he had just witnessed. The humans had not reacted with fear. They had assessed, planned, and executed. They had used the environment, their tools, and the creature's own instincts against it. They had faced an apex predator not as prey, but as competitors. He looked at Ava, who was calmly checking her rifle's power cell. He looked at Ben, who was offering Lyra a nutrient paste from his pack. Xyler finally managed to ask, his voice thin over the comms. "How are you not paralyzed by fear? The data on that creature is explicit. It is a perfect killing machine." Ava looked at him, her expression unreadable through her helmet's visor. "Perfect is a strong word. It's big, it's tough, and it's hungry. We have things like that back on Earth. You learn how to deal with them." "Things like that?" Lyra quavered. Plural. Ben laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Oh yeah, big cats that hunt from trees, bears that can outrun a ground car, sharks that are basically torpedoes with teeth. Not to mention the snakes, spiders, and jellyfish. The Skittermaw is honestly kind of a one-trick pony, big and loud, predictable." A profound silence fell over the alien members of the team. The puzzle pieces in Xyler's mind began to slam into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and magnificent. The Concordance hadn't redacted the files on Earth's biology to prevent psychological instability from fear. They had redacted them to prevent the galaxy from understanding the truth. The term Death World was a galactic standard, a classification for planets hostile to galactic life, but it was a misnomer. Earth wasn't a death world, it was a crucible. It was a training ground, and the humans weren't the ones who had survived by hiding in a corner. They were the ones who had graduated. The trip to Earth was surprisingly easy to arrange. Citing the success of the Xylo's practical and the clear synergistic potential between human and non-human survival strategies, Xyler submitted a proposal for an interspecies field study. The Academy, eager to publish papers on its new, enigmatic members, approved it with record speed. Ava and Ben agreed to act as guides, seemingly delighted at the prospect of showing their classmates their home. Lyra was hesitant, her experience on Xylos having left a deep-seated unease, while Grak was driven by a new, burning curiosity to see the world that could produce such deceptively capable beings. Their shuttle, a standard diplomatic courier, broke atmosphere over a vast, swirling vortex of white vapor that Ava casually identified as a hurricane. "Don't worry," she'd said, noticing their expressions of alarm. "We're landing on the other side of the planet. We'll just have some rain for a few days." They didn't land in a sterile, domed spaceport as Xyler had anticipated. Instead, Ava directed the shuttle to a flat, grassy field in a region she called Wyoming. The moment the ramp lowered, Xyler's senses were assaulted. The first thing that hit him was the air. It was thick, heavy, and overwhelmingly complex. His suit's external sensors identified nitrogen and oxygen, of course, but also a staggering soup of pollen, water vapor, dust, and thousands of volatile organic compounds released by the planet's flora. It was chaotic, unfiltered, and alive. The sheer pressure of it, one standard G, felt crushing after the modulated environment of the Academy. Grack, who had expected to feel at home, looked uncomfortable. "The pull is right," he grunted, "but it feels uneven." Ben grinned. "That's the Earth's lumpy mantle for you, microgravity fluctuations, you get used to it." The second assault was the noise. On Cathar Prime, the only sounds were the ones his people made. Here, the air thrummed with a million sources of sound. The chirping of countless unseen insects, the melodic calls of flying creatures Ava called birds, the rustle of wind through grass that was sharp and blade-like, and a low, persistent hum that seemed to emanate from the planet itself. Xyler's analytical mind, which craved order and clear data, felt like it was drowning in static. And then there was the light. The star of this system, Sol, was a brilliant yellow-white, and its light was blindingly intense. It cast sharp, clear shadows and heated Xyler's black carapace to an uncomfortable degree within minutes. "Welcome to my backyard," Ben said, spreading his arms wide. He had taken off his helmet, a gesture of profound recklessness that made Lyra flinch. He inhaled deeply. "Ah, nothing like it." Ava led them from the field towards a small structure made of wood and rock. "This is a ranger station," she explained. "We'll base ourselves here. It's the edge of a national park called Yellowstone." For the next few days, the aliens existed in a state of perpetual, low-grade terror. Lyra spent most of her time inside the station, staring out the transparent silica panels. The sheer biodiversity was overwhelming for her. Her homeworld, Aquaria, had life, but it was a harmonious ecosystem of bioluminescent algae, slow-moving kelp forests, and gentle, current-riding herbivores. Here, everything was in a state of frantic, competitive motion. She watched as one of the birds, a hawk, plummeted from the sky and snatched a small, furry mammal from the grass. The casual, brutal efficiency of the act made her retreat from the window, her smooth skin pale. "It's just the circle of life," Ava had explained gently, seeing her distress. "Your world is made of circles of death," Lyra had whispered back. Grack, driven to understand the source of human strength, attempted to engage with the environment. He tried to lift a fallen log, something he could have done with ease at the Academy. But the wood was dense, heavy with moisture, and home to a teeming colony of insects that swarmed over his rocky hands, their tiny legs and mandibles searching for purchase. He dropped it with a startled roar. Ben had laughed. "Careful, Grack, that's an old pine, deceptively heavy, and you just disturbed a carpenter ant colony. They bite." He then proceeded to pick up a thick branch, half Grack's size, and snap it over his knee to use for firewood. The casual display of functional strength, of tendon and bone and leverage applied with terrifying efficiency, left Grack speechless. It wasn't just raw power. It was an innate, physical understanding of a complex, uncooperative world. Xyler, meanwhile, was trying to process it all. He took samples. A single gram of soil contained more unique microorganisms than the entire planetary database of Cathar Prime. He analyzed the weather. The temperature could swing 20 degrees in a single day, from scorching heat to a biting cold that came with the night. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in one afternoon, an event Ava and Ben treated with the mild inconvenience of an unexpected traffic jam. For Xyler, it was a cataclysm. The sky turned black, the wind howled with physical force and bolts of pure plasma, lightning arced from the clouds to the ground, releasing deafening shockwaves of sound. He recorded energy discharges in a single bolt that could have powered the Academy for a cycle, and the humans just sat on the porch of their wooden shelter, watching it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ava had said, her voice filled with genuine awe. One evening, Ben convinced them to take a short walk to a nearby geothermal pool. The ground steamed and the air was thick with the smell of sulfur, reminding Xyler of xylos. But this wasn't a dead, toxic landscape. The hot, mineral-rich water was host to vibrant mats of thermophilic bacteria, painting the edges of the pool in iridescent shades of orange, yellow, and green. Life here had not just survived the planet's hostile geology, it had adapted to thrive within it, turning poison into sustenance. As they stood there, a deep, guttural howl echoed from the surrounding hills. It was a mournful, hungry sound that vibrated deep in Xyler's thorax. Lyra let out a small cry and moved closer to Ava. Grack instinctively adopted a defensive stance. "Wolves," Ben said, his voice quiet. He didn't seem afraid. If anything, he sounded reverent. "They're making a comeback in this area." They are predators, Xyler asked, his mandibles clicking nervously. One of the top, Ava confirmed. They hunt in packs, incredibly smart, and you are not concerned. We are outside, unprotected, Grack rumbled. Ava finally looked at them, and in her eyes, Xyler saw the missing piece of the puzzle. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't aggression, it was something far more profound. We are, she said softly. But they are too, they know what we are. For millions of years, things like them hunted our ancestors. So our ancestors learned to hunt back. We're not their natural prey anymore. There's a professional courtesy. Xyler stared at her. The empathy of predators. A respect born not of peace, but of a shared history of violence at the absolute peak of the food chain. That was the bond he had sensed between Ava and Ben in the refectory. It wasn't just friendship. It was a pact bond, an unspoken understanding of mutual capability forged in a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Their last day, they visited a human city. It was, in its own way, as terrifying as the wilderness. The structures towered, scraping the sky, but they weren't sealed. They were open to the violent weather, to the corrosive atmosphere. Plants grew in cracks in the pavement, birds nested on ledges. The entire construct was a testament not to defeating nature, but to stubbornly coexisting with it. Millions of humans, predators all, were living packed together in a concrete jungle that was itself nested within a real one. The sheer potential for conflict, for chaos, was staggering. Yet there was a symphony to it, a flow of traffic, a hum of commerce, a shared social infrastructure that was as complex and resilient as any ecosystem they had witnessed. As their shuttle prepared for departure, lifting off from the grassy field in Wyoming, Xyler, Lyra, and Grack watched the blue and white marble of Earth recede. They were silent for a long time, processing the sheer, overwhelming reality of it. Their classification is not just wrong, Lyra said finally, her voice full of a strange new awe. It's insufficient. There is no word for what their world is. There is, Grack rumbled, his gaze fixed on the screen. It is a crucible, and they are the result. Xyler finally looked away from the image of Earth. His analytical mind had been shattered and reforged. He had arrived seeking to correct a data point, to solve a logical inconsistency. He was leaving with a truth far more complicated. He thought of the Skittermaw on Xylos, a creature feared across the academy. On Earth, it would be just another monster. It would have a name, a place in the local mythology, and park rangers would warn tourists to store their food properly to avoid attracting it. The galaxy saw humans as an anomaly, a fragile race of thinkers from an impossibly violent world. They were wrong. The violence of their world was not a handicap. It was the source of their greatest strengths. Their boundless curiosity, their reckless courage, their unbreakable bonds, their terrifying ingenuity, all were adaptations for surviving a world of breathtaking beauty and unrelenting lethality. He thought of the future. What would happen when the rest of the Concordance truly understood? When they realized that every human, from the boisterous Ben Carter to the calm Ava Chen, was a descendant of a line of apex predators that had conquered a planet so savage it defied classification. Would they react with fear, or with the same respectful awe that Xyler now felt? He did not know. The data was incomplete. For the first time in his life, Xyler of the Cathar was comfortable with the uncertainty. The galaxy was about to get a lot more complicated, and he had a feeling that humanity, the ultimate survivor, was just getting started. The empathy of predators was a concept the galaxy would have to learn, one way or another.